problem? No problem?
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think we are in a little bit live. Alrighty. Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Live with Naz. Well, no, not actually Live with Naz. This is our Laughter for All podcast with Comedian Nazareth. This is our 37th episode, and I'm excited today to for our guest today uh, because our yeah uh, yes because Michael Reagor is an attorney in Colorado, but he's also a very, very, very good friend of mine and of my family, and our families are friends, and we get together several times a year, ev- even even though he is in Colorado and I'm in Southern California, um, and the reason I asked Michael to be with us today is because a lot of people going through this pandemic, we were losing loved ones, and we were scared about our future and our lives. And I thought he would be the ideal guest to have today to talk to us about planning, about wills, about estate planning, about just plan. Coming from an experienced attorney and estate planner, but also a Christian man who loves the Lord and knows the Word of God. So Michael Reagor is a successful litigator and transactional attorney with over 25 years of experience. Mr. Rigor brings his passion and attention to detail from the courtroom to the business and estate planning table. Mr. Rigor's practice focuses on personal relationships and building value through tested values, including honesty, character, and integrity. Outside his practice, Mr. Rigor is actively involved in numerous national and local charities and boards, including Laughter for All. He is one of, with the, on our board. He's our secretary of the Laughter for All board, and academic honors. He's an American Jurisprudence Award recipient, commercial transactions, academic All-American, men's soccer in 1987. By the way, this man is a professional soccer player, legend. We'll talk about that. Other training is conflict coaching certification, Peacemaker, conflict and mediation certification training, Peacemaker. So remind me, I'm going to ask him questions about being a peacemaker in this time. He is a United States Army Reserve from 84 to 91. So thank you. All righty. How are you, Michael?
Hey, Ness. Sounds like you
Okay.
were reading some credentials there. I'm doing great. Thank you.
Well, good. Well, my first question to you, of course, is you were a professional soccer player for a while.
Well,
Tell us about
growing
that.
up before I was a believer, yeah, I was a soccer player and obtained direction in life and some opportunity, but I wasn't a full-time professional. When I was a kid, I was a youth player from Texas, from Dallas, and then I was one of the first Americans to be an apprentice or a young professional in England, and that was back when you guys are in LA. David Beckham makes millions of dollars, but back then the David Beckhams were making a lot less, and so had the opportunity and privilege of doing that before I came back to the United States, and had the privilege of playing collegiately, paid for my college by playing soccer, and the Lord used all of that also to give direction. So I'm very thankful for the opportunities that I was given through soccer.
Now, you went to Southern Nazarene or University of Texas?
Well, I went to both. I studied as an undergraduate at the University of Oklahoma and Southern Nazarene University. There's a sister school in California called Point Loma.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a sister school with Southern Nazarene University. And then I did graduate work at the University of Texas. I have a graduate degree in public policy. I had a mentor and I was interested, and I thought I'd go into public policy or politics. You don't need a degree for that. I think you just need to be jaded. But Um, after I finished my graduate degree, then I went to law school at the University of Houston and worked there for just a short period. And then my wife, Cindy, is from Colorado, so I had the privilege of moving here and have practiced here in Metro Denver for the last since 1992.
And your son is very intelligent, and now he is working. What university in New York?
Yeah, so my oldest child, Caleb, is a PhD candidate at Cornell. It's a tri-institutional program. It's between Cornell and Rockefeller and NYU, but he's at Cornell University. He's actually, I call him a lab slave. His duties are to take care of the specimens. They don't use rats or mice there. They use zebrafish because they have apparently skin that mimics or cells that mimic the human ear. So
they have a zebrafish because there's no PETA doesn't care about zebrafish.
Okay, that could be the reason. But anyway, and he's up on the Upper East Side of New York City. And then I have a daughter, Rachel. She's a junior at Colorado Christian University.
That's awesome. And you're a professional fly fisherman.
No.
People don't know that.
Well, I love to spread the gospel. And on the rivers that we go to, often our phones won't work. And that's the greatest blessing. And so I like to teach people about God's provision in the river. And a trout is a beautiful creature, and just being the sound of water is healing. And so I love being on the water, and it's really a ministry that I have.
That's awesome. Here, I wrote something from your side. It says, I want to control my property while I'm alive, take care of me and my loved ones if I become disabled, and give what I have to whom I want, the way I want, and when I want. Furthermore, if I can, I want to save every last tax dollar, professional fees, and court costs legally possible. So here's it says 3 keys not used by rich and famous. Number 1, maintaining control during incapacity, quick and cheap wealth transfer at death, and protecting beneficiaries from others themselves. And it's funny that you put some, and this is preparing to our conversation, like James Dean, the actor James Dean. This is an example of celebrities who never, what do you call it? They never planned. James Dean died at age 29 without a will. His entire estate, including licensing fees, passed to his father, who had abandoned him as a child. Licensing fees generate $1 million to $3 million annually. So this is all went to his dad, who really abandoned him as a child, but because James Dean didn't plan. Marilyn Monroe died at the age of 36. Well, left 75% to her acting coach, Lee Strasberg, with wishes to donate to charity. Well, Strasberg later married, and at death in 1982, his estate plus all Monroe's licensing and royalty fees went to his widow.
Yeah. Was his widow's name Charity?
No, it never went. She didn't care about charity, so all the money now is going to that widow of the actor. Is about $1 million annually. Okay, couple more quick examples. The Woolworth misfortune. Barbara Hutton and F.W. Woolworth, granddaughter of the founder, at age 10 inherited $25 million in trust. The trust is now worth $50 million. Ended when Barbara turned 21 in 1933. 46 years and 7 husbands later, dies at age 66 with mere $3,000. That's all she had left from the almost $50 million, because there was no planning. John Denver, the country singer. Oh, Denver. Well, that fits with where you live. Died in a plane crash in 97 with no estate plan. 19 million estate probate and IRS disputes took over 6 years. Denver failed to name pension beneficiary. Result, loss of tens of millions in taxes and tax-free compounding over the life of his children. So why should a Christian be concerned with making plans for the future, Mr. Rigor? What do you say?
Well, you started out with whenever I talk to people, and my area is trust and estate law. What's a little bit unique about what I do is I have the privilege of helping. A lot of what I do is help high net worth Christians give property away, but I'm a planner. A planner means someone who helps people create plans. I take your ideas as a client and I put them on paper and give them form. And then I'm also involved in, as just to say a little about my practice, dispute resolution. I'm a litigator. I was previously a litigator for 10 years before I went full time into trust and estate law. And so I have a background in going before courts. Trust matters, estate matters are before courts as opposed to juries. There aren't juries. And then finally, I have staff who are involved in we're involved in administration. So we have a euphemism when somebody goes to see Jesus, hopefully their estate matures. And that euphemism means that there may be some work that's needed in more complex matters. It could be a period of time, but we help people. Those are the three major areas of trust and estate law. And I have the privilege of being involved in all of them. When you started, you just gave a definition. When I talk to anyone and I ask them questions, they basically give you the same definition as of estate planning. Hey, what is estate planning to you? And the answer is always some form of those three things. I want to control my property while I'm alive. Okay. I want to be able to provide for my loved ones and myself in my incapacity. Okay. And then when I die, I want to be able to give my property away to whom I want, in the manner that I want, when I want. And finally, I want to involve accountants and lawyers as little as possible. I'd like to have, a family handle those affairs. And you gave four, you took four prime examples that I had given you of basic estate planning errors. I mean, the first error is James Dean died without a will. He died intestate. And his problem was the same problem that I was telling you about earlier with regard to Michael Jackson. For a long time, the IRS wasn't concerned, and certainly people that who were living fast and loose, like James Dean, weren't concerned with royalties after they died, but his estranged father received everything. So my friend has a saying on his website that is, rarely does anything in life go well without any planning. You can relate to that. Rarely does anything in life go well without planning. I have another way of saying it. It's a little more stark, but I think it's true because my own father, died intestate. The one way to tell your family that you don't love them is to do no planning. Okay.
Wow. Let's say that again. The one way
to tell your family that you don't love them is to do no planning. So there are different ways to express that, but Scripture directs us as believers to be stewards with everything that is given to us. And there are many scriptures that I could refer to, but the main idea is that we're called to be stewards. And in that role as stewards, that means we have to plan.
Now, what do you tell someone who doesn't have a lot of money, doesn't have what do you say to them?
So in the past 20 years, about 5% of all Americans have done any form of planning. Okay. 1 out of 20 people. And you don't have to have a complex financial you don't have to have a complex financial life or non-financial life, because planning is about money and non-money issues. That's typically how I teach people about how to do planning. But if you don't have a simple will, then you'll die intestate. James Dean, the way that our intestate laws work is that in England in the late 16th century, Parliament decided that all this land was being broken up and people were receiving it. First and second sons were receiving land, and they decided that they had to have a set of rules. Not everybody had a will. You could have a will, but what about people who died and didn't have a will? So you needed a presumption. So Parliament came up with this set of rules that they believed would reflect the decisions you would make if you had made a will. Okay. It's called the Statute of Descent and Distribution. Well, most people when they die, if they didn't have a will, they would want their property probably to go to their parents. Okay. If they weren't married, or if they didn't have any children, no descendants, and they weren't married, and they had parents, that'd be the order. First to my descendants, or my wife. It works in combination under Colorado and California, and then up to my parents. So he had no children. He wasn't married. His father then, under the same law, California had the same law that came down 400 years earlier. It was the presumption that he would have given it to his parents if he had written a will. Well, that presumption was not correct. So you can't let the presumptions of the statute of descent and distribution control. And the same thing. The second example that you used was the example of Marilyn Monroe. I think that was the second example.
Yes, that was Marilyn.
Well, what was the error that she made? She gave all her money to Lee Strasberg. A lot of Americans remember it. I mean, I guess I'm old enough to remember who Lee Strasberg was. And she said, okay, here it all is, but I want you to give a quarter of it to charity. Well, that's not enforceable. That was the whole point. Strasberg got remarried. He had it all in his hand. That was an unenforceable request by Marilyn Monroe. And Strasberg's surviving spouse, whom I presume wasn't named Charity, got the money. So that was also a lack of planning. That was not enforceable. But I think our beliefs as Christians, the Bible, which I regard as true, and giving direction for life, tells me that I need to plan and I need to be a steward. Which of us, before we build something, will go forward and do that without first counting the cost? The writer in Proverbs asks us. So it's pretty simple. It's even more simple now because not just to finish up with this statement, in California now, over half of all marriages end in divorce. That's a remarkable number. And, California leads the nation in so many ways, so many good ways and so many not so good ways. But now people don't marry at the rate that they used to. But even the Christians are the ones that keep the marriage rate up, I think. But and the marriage rate in the church, I guess, is higher. The divorce rate in the church is higher than outside the church. That's because people outside the church don't marry at the rate those who are in the church.
Oh, that's why. Okay, because they always say, "Oh, the Christians are getting divorced more." Okay, you think the other ones are still married, but the Christians are getting divorced.
Right.
Okay, that's why.
So when Woolworth left his fortune to his 10-year-old granddaughter, when it came to her without any directions, okay, what happened is she received it outright without restrictions, and then she lived a licentious life, a really wild life. She spent it on all the wrong things, and then she died penniless. And even back at the turn of the 20th century, we had these tools. Hutton, the granddaughter, if simply had included a few provisions in there, given her a bank as a trustee, include some limits on distributions, like provide for her need, but not for her happiness, then all of that property could have been available to really bless her for a lifetime. But Mr. Woolworth did not plan. He did not plan like so many other wealth scions we've heard about in the United States, the Rockefellers, the Hearsts, not really the Vanderbilts, but you got to do some planning. There was recently an article, all the Vanderbilts gathered in Nashville for 150-year reunion for the university. Not a single descendant from Cornelius Vanderbilt was a millionaire.
Wow.
Not a single descendant.
Interesting. Okay, let's say I come to you. I am a person that I live hand to mouth. I don't have a lot of money saved, and I have kids, and I have college fund and all that. For example, I'm assuming. Okay, how can you plan for me? How can you help me plan?
There are a number of practices, estate planning practices, and they might be general practices with some people that specialize in this area. but they will offer estate planning services, and they'll be limited. Skilled or experienced attorneys can provide cost-effective planning. When we plan for our property, we typically do it around one of two instruments, either a will or a trust. And a trust is simply an agreement between you and yourself to hold your property a particular way. A will is a document that only takes effect on death. But you can go to any number of these people. I'm part of the Wealth Council group, and the Wealth Council group really is a group. You can go to www.wealthcouncil.com, and you can find people in my community. I have a lot of colleagues in Wealth Council in California. They're all over California, and I do a lot of work in California. I'll tell you why shortly, but but I don't typically do estate planning for ordinary Californians. I do see a lot of Californians as well, because where do people flee when they have enough of California? They often come to it's Texas or Colorado. We have the mountains, so Texas doesn't have the mountains. So, and also your little home in San Diego used to be able to buy you a mansion here in Denver. Maybe not so much anymore, but when you come to that practitioner, if they're skilled and they have experience, you can talk to them for 15, 20 minutes, tell them basically your story. They may want a worksheet. I have a worksheet I ask people to fill out to give me information so I can do a good job interviewing like Nazareth does. And then I can tell them pretty quickly what I think they ought to do. But you should do comprehensive planning. That is, you should take care of healthcare issues as well as property issues, okay? And you should do it with one attorney. If you do it once every, we go see a lawyer for estate planning when our lives change or when the law changes, but go and do it at least once. Some of my clients come back and see me every 5 years, 10 years, whatever. But you can have a cost-effective plan prepared by a skilled attorney who can interview you. Things cost a little more in California, in urban areas at least. But, I would think that a complete estate plan, I know some practitioners in California who can offer a complete estate plan and which means putting a plan together, interviewing, teaching you the questions that you need to ask, educating you about estate planning, for in a simple case, less than $2,000.
Wow. Now, what is the difference? I mean, the difference between a will and an estate or a trust. What's the difference between a will and a trust?
So a will is a document that only comes into effect at your death. And there's actually, you've heard the phrase last will and testament. So actually a will and a testament were two separate things. They're in England 500 years ago. Today, they're the same thing, but it's a document that comes into effect only when you die. And it sets forth or can set forth your intentions with regard to your property after you die. A trust, on the other hand, is an agreement between a person who's holding property, which we call a trustee, for the benefit of another person whom we call a beneficiary, right? Mm-hmm. To use the property that the trustee is holding for the benefit or in a particular way for the beneficiary. Now, a lot of Americans use a revocable or a living trust. It's a really good tool. I write a lot of these, but a living trust is an agreement between Nazareth and Maha, with Nazareth and Maha to hold their property in a particular way. And people use these revocable trusts because they have certain benefits during different times of life. First of all, they're good for incapacity planning. If Casey Kasem, who in a lot of California,
a friend of mine.
Well, and of course, his saga resulted in a new law in California allowing adult children access to their parents. But his story is a great tragedy. But if his property had been held more effectively in a living trust and his kids had been involved, a lot of the conflict and cost and issues would have been involved. But so there's incapacity planning when you use a trust. It's much more effective than a durable power. Then you have privacy. All the administration is private. Okay. And that includes after death. Okay. And then with regard to any complexity, A lot of people think about a trust as a big bucket where you pour all of your assets into, and you can tell your trustee how to handle all the property, or it can be handled together so you can bring it all together. So what you have is comprehensive administration. So with regard to incapacity planning, privacy, handling all of your assets, okay, and then finally terminal planning. I talked about Barbara Hutton. If Barbara Hutton, Woolworth's granddaughter, if she had a trust that dealt in detail with some of the potential issues, like don't let her have more than she needs at any particular time in life, and it had left some instructions for the trustee to follow, then maybe those assets would have been preserved better. So those are four main reasons that people use revocable trust. That's what a revocable trust is. But a trust is simply an agreement between a person who is the person who sets up a trust is a settlor or a trustor, a settlor, okay? And they give property, the settlor gives property to the trustee, and it could be the same person, and the trustee's holding that property for the benefit of another person, beneficiary, okay?
So let me simplify it. So let's say me and Maha we have a house and we have a car, or they have maybe a little saving. So we want to give this to our kid. We want to make sure our kids get this after we die, or one of us dies, without having to go through a lot of fees and legalities. So what I would do is I would go to, me and Maha are called trustees, right?
Well, what you and Maha are called, I think in the example you gave me, let's start simple. You want to make a will first. So if I can, you go to an estate attorney and and you're a will maker, which is a testator. She's a female will maker. She's a testatrix. Okay. And she writes a will. And the will, though, only deals with property at death. So if you want to deal with property during your incapacity, you've got to use some other tools.
What do you mean during incapacity? What does that term mean?
So
it means when I'm sick?
Right. So we know Nazareth is going to go see Jesus, but it could be that he has a period of time where he's not thinking straight. I was talking to Maha the other day. She was complaining about
she would tell you I am already in that stage.
Okay. So slobbering, you can't feed yourself, all the ordinary things, Naz.
Okay.
But
maybe.
but let's, if you don't have instructions, if Woolworth's granddaughter became incapacitated and there were no instructions in the trust to take care of her when she was disabled or incapacitated, her friend could drive her down to the local Roach Motel, take all her money and leave her in the Roach Motel, right? Well, that isn't how she'd want to be taken care of. So so a will only is effective at death, and you got to deal with incapacity planning. And typically that's with a healthcare power or a document to deal with property called a durable power of attorney.
Now, can someone write a will between him and his wife together, or they have to go get a lawyer or get someone to, would the state accept a little, okay, me and my wife, we wrote a will and we signed it. We went to what do you call it? Public, what do you call it? Those guys that were
a notary.
A notary public, and they approve it. Is this valid?
So under most state laws, a will is valid if it is signed by the testator in front of the will maker, in front of two witnesses, or the signature is verified by a notary. Okay. Yeah. So there are validity requirements for a will. There are exceptions for handwritten wills called holographic wills. Okay. But the main thing is if you do it right with the local attorney, your will be admitted to probate. Probate is it's just judicial. It's anything related to judicial administration of a will after you die. If you miss any of the formalities, your will may be admitted to probate, but it may be a lot more difficult and costly and complex, because then someone has to show up, an attorney, and say, this was Nazareth's will. It doesn't look like it. His signature wasn't verified by a notary. There weren't two witnesses, but I'm going to prove that this is Nazareth's will. So I have a hearing and I prove it's Nazareth's will. The court says it's admitted. Okay. But it could be that it's going to cost you a lot more for me to get that will admitted than if you hired someone to do it right. we have a saying at our office here. We have a saying here. The saying is, the one thing we have to get right is execution. Okay. Everything else can go wrong, but you would expect your estate planning lawyer to know the requirements for formalities of wills and trusts.
Okay, so now people know, hey, you need everyone listening or watching, you need to have at least a will. You have to have it official. Go to an attorney if you can, or have it notary public. When you do it, print it out, sign it, and do that. That's the first step for people who. Then you have a little more stuff. What is in okay? During my incapacity, there's something say that I can choose a person who will be taking care of me, my decisions if I'm sick. What is that called? A
The person
medical,
would be called an agent.
an age. Isn't there a term for that? My what do you call it?
Well, if you don't, if Nazareth became incapacitated and a dispute arose about how to handle his property for his care while he was incapacitated, a court might have a hearing and appoint someone to serve as a conservator.
Mm.
And or if it relates to your personal care, it would be a guardian. So you want to make sure you have effective planning. You can either do healthcare planning for incapacity or disability with a trust, or you can have an effective, durable power of attorney.
Okay, so if someone who makes a medical, like I remember when my dad passed, before he passed away, I signed that I'll make the medical decisions, like when to pull the plug and all that. What is that called?
Well, thank the Lord you didn't have that power under law or otherwise, but you're an agent, you're a healthcare agent. Okay.
Okay.
So,
Now,
and he
if
was
I
the principal, and he
yeah.
assigned you, he signed a document saying, Nazareth will make my decisions if I cannot make the decision.
Now, you know my wife, Maha. Should I have her? Because she would pull the plug right now if she have to. No, I'm just kidding. You gotta have someone who's pro-life and pro and likes you, and you never pranked him before. Because you give someone that authority now, and when you get incapacitated, it's time. It's payback time, right?
So, you can imagine things that go wrong, but you do. I mean, as a Christian, you want to make sure that when people are making healthcare decisions for you, they're making those decisions consistent with your worldview. And so, what I recommend is that Christians um, uh, not have someone who doesn't understand their worldview or their view of life, the sanctity of life, as a decision maker. It can be hard because you want your children or other close loved ones involved, but it may be that they're not the right people. And that's one of the things that you need to consider as you're appointing someone. There was a newspaper article that came out. Everybody, this so much back to California, but Gary Coleman was in a hospital in Los Angeles right before his death, and he had an estranged wife. Okay, and she was, I think they were still married, but she was still there, sort of like the Shivo, Mr. Shivo, but he was, apparently she was present, and the report was that he had certain instructions about how to keep him alive, and the allegation was that somehow the estranged wife got the hospital and the healthcare providers to tear it up. So Mr. Coleman, you recall, expired. Everybody remembers when Gary Coleman, I mean, he was sort of the most famous midget black person in America, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, I remember him. But
But
okay, here's a question. What? Go ahead.
no, so what I'm saying is, if you're gonna make someone the person to make decisions for you, it's not something, it's not like buying a Coke out of a machine. You need to be careful about it.
Right. Yeah, we talked earlier before the live conversation about Michael Jackson and Prince. Can you tell my audience a little bit about that situation?
Well, several years ago, the IRS. So if you die, a lot of states no longer have state death taxes. California used to have an estate tax, doesn't have it anymore. And a lot of states discovered that you drove people out when you had more taxes. Okay, they're still discovering that in New York and other places. Well, there was a trend for states to get rid of these state estate taxes. So when you die, if you have right now, if you're holding more than $11.7 million, it's going to go back down to half of that. So imagine about $5.5 million at the end of 2025, January 1, 2026. But if you're holding in your hand more than $5.5 million after 2025, you have a taxable estate. Now, you can give an unlimited amount of your estate away to your spouse, but she has the same coupon, if you will, that you have. It's $5.5 million. So if she's already holding $5.5 million and you die and you give her another $5.5 million, how much of her $5.5 million, how much of her $11 million is going to be taxable? Half of it, right? In my example. So we have tools that we use to prevent that from happening. We make sure that husband and wife each use this coupon. So the coupon is up to $5.5 million. You can give it away, but there are unlimited gifts you can give. One of the unlimited gifts is to your spouse, as I was just saying. It's non-taxable, but it's reportable. And you can give an unlimited amount away to charities like Laughter for All, right?
Yes, praise God. Did you hear it, people? We can use it.
So if you do, but if you give to a child or a friend, you can only give up to $5.5 million, and every dollar over that amount is taxable at 40 cents on the dollar. So rich people who have more than that, they have these techniques that they use. They make sure that they use all the tools that the government gives us. But states had death taxes, and most of them got rid of them, and some of them they're the same as the federal, okay, but some of them are lower. We call these decoupled. They're not at the same level. So if you die in Minnesota, you don't have a death tax, federal or state, North Carolina, Massachusetts, up to $1 million. But at $1 million, you have to pay a state death tax all the way up to $5.5 million. So between 1 and 5.5, you got to pay a state death tax, right? And then above that, you have to pay some tax. Well, certain people, movie stars, those who had royalties that are going to come later, James Dean now still getting royalties, they need to plan now, because when Jackson died, there was a dispute over the validity of the will, and there were several wills. There's still litigation going on today with regard to Clark Gable's estate. There were 27 alleged wills. I think he died in 1969. There were 27, as I recall, alleged wills. They disputed over which one was a valid will. Well, Jackson had at least 2 wills, and I haven't followed it in detail. But Jackson became more famous after death because the IRS said, well, the estate, which is going to be whoever the beneficiaries are, and apparently it was his
mother,
children.
Michael Jackson's. His children, Prince, and what?
But the IRS, that Jackson said, well, we want to pay a tax, and they had to pay a tax of everything in the estate over $5 million, essentially. Okay, we go back to when he died, $4 or $5 million, and they said, we think we're going to get $10 million in revenue from royalties in the future from Jackson's music, right? Right. Well, the IRS said, not so fast. We think you're going to get $500 million. Okay, which is probably more realistic. Well, you ask, well, how and what's the tax on that? It's 40%, right? So you ask, they, what are they going to do? Are they going to, what are they going to do? Is the state of California going to take Neverland and create a theme park there? Okay. That might be, they might end up having to do that. But the point is that there's going to be a state death tax that's due because of that. Robin Williams, before he died, his attorneys were focused on this, and a lot of people knew about it. And he set up a foundation, and basically all the royalties that come in from Robin Williams' work, they are paid over for a long, long period of time to the charity, the nonprofit that he set up. So Robin Williams intentionally planned and now avoids the issue that that came up with Jackson. And remember, Prince died without a will. He died intestate, just like Aretha Franklin did just a couple of years ago. So it's hard to imagine. Prince's estate was worth $300 million, and he did no planning. And so once again, you have to do some planning. But the point of Michael Jackson is he had a messed up life. A, he needed Jesus. B, you got to do some planning. You got to do some planning. And if you, I have this, there's a saying that I think you have, the more that you've been entrusted with, the more complex it is, and the more you're going to have to work at it. And people don't want to hear this. So some of my clients, I make it clear this way: the more you have, the more people are trying to take from you. Okay. You live in California. Everybody in California can relate to that. So you should do some planning. It doesn't have to be complex. The more that you have, the more conflict that you have in your family, okay, then you're going to have to do more planning.
Speaking of conflict, let me switch the subject. A few years ago, I know you were on my board of Laughter for All from the beginning, and we were doing stadium events and all these big events, and I'm praying we get back to that. One time we were doing a stadium event in San Bernardino, and one of the artists was being a prima donna. We'll never mention names, but he didn't want to come out and perform because it was raining, and to walk to the stage, his white shoes or her white shoes, we won't know what it is, would be bothered. So I was upset about that, and I came to you in one of the suites that we were there, and I said, I'm really upset that this has happened, and last time, and we're trying to be nice, and we hired them again, and all of a sudden you said, Naz, you know what? You can't be talking when the guy is not here or the person's not here. And it's really, this is one of the things that really touched me, because you're also a peacemaker, or, tell us about that, and how can people not people, maybe there's a pastor listening and they're having conflicts with maybe staff, with deacons, with board members. How do we deal with that? How do you deal with that?
Well, the Bible is a complete instruction manual on conflict resolution, and everything that we need to be peacemakers. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount calls us to be peacemakers. 30 years ago, an attorney by the name of Ken Sande wrote a book called The Peacemakers, calling all Christian attorneys to really take on that role. And Peacemakers was started, and they were in Montana. I have a partner who was in charge of their Institute for Christian Conciliation in Montana for a number of years. They changed, and they're back in Colorado, but they offered biblical coaching. They offered conflict coaching, and then certified Christian conciliation training. You don't have to be a lawyer to do it. A lot of more non-lawyers than lawyers do it, but they basically take these 4 basic principles, and they teach people how to use these 4 basic principles to resolve conflict, either with your neighbor or your spouse or your child. And the principles apply regardless of the setting. The first thing we do is we take the log out of our own eye. Take the log out of our own eye. The second thing that we do is we address our direct concern with our with the person that we're having an issue with. If we feel we've been wronged, we need to address it. Okay. And then the third part of that is we need to come to some mutually acceptable solution that will resolve our concerns as well as our brother's concerns. And then finally, we need to go and glorify God. Peacemakers been teaching for generations, for 30 years now, these principles. And I just set them forth in a very basic sense, but people who go through training become conflict coaches or certified Christian conciliators, it makes a difference. The problem is in the legal profession, it's dominated by secular concerns. And when people have an issue and they need it resolved, the great irony in our society, and everybody in California can relate to this, is that we go out and hire an attorney to help resolve our concern. That's like going out and buying a gallon of gasoline to put out a fire.
Okay. That's
Okay.
right.
And so there's a group of Christian lawyers throughout the United States. Most of them, you can find them through the Christian Legal Society or through Peacemaker. They're certified conciliators all across the United States and the world. But if we really believe that Jesus is the key to our reconciliation with God, and that his sacrifice makes it possible for me to be reconciled with you, then we need to preach that and teach that and make it a part of our lives. And so I'm committed to that. And I'm very proud of the fact that the attorneys in my office and as part of my background, we have certified Christian conciliators here. It makes perfect sense for those who are trained in the law to do it. But so often, there's really a spirit of aggression and complexity. And I do a lot of trust litigation in California, and it is very expensive. It's very wearing, and people need to turn to Jesus in all of these issues. I just recently finished a case in California where I have two sisters not speaking to each other. The one in California, her husband is a well-known lawyer in a particular area, and he's a Sunday school teacher and a deacon at his church, and he refuses to speak to his in-laws. And we did a mediation out in California, and they wouldn't even come down and see us. We went out there to do this. And so it's a sad story. Those of us who claim Jesus is our Savior, we need to understand what he was teaching, and we need to put that in practice in our lives.
Wow, that's sad. Do you have any lawyer jokes? Because you're a great lawyer. You're a kind Christian, wonderful, wonderful, a great husband, a great dad, all this. So, the whole reputation, especially with comedians from the beginning. Are you going to pay me for this? Just mail it. Or if, so how, no jokes, no attorney jokes.
No, but
I
I
never
think
done any.
I don't know if I've ever, it is true that when people go to law school, there's a lot of people don't know this, but during the first year of law school, each law school in the United States has a certain number of these specially certified vices. And what happens is each first year law student has to put their brain in the vice, okay, for a minimum of 30 days, okay? And the vice is tightened, okay? And by the time that first year law student comes out and is a second year law student, something has changed. Something has changed.
Uh-huh.
And it was exemplified in a story I heard where a pastor, an eye doctor, and a lawyer were golfing together. And they were at this famous golf course, and they were waiting for their day. And the day had come, and they were pretty good. So they met down at the golf course, and they began to play. Well, it was a little bit slow, and they were talking. They could see in front of them. They didn't know what was going on, so they were murmuring, and they weren't highly complimentary of the group ahead of them. And it continued for a while until they got about halfway through, and one of the groundskeepers came by and heard that they were concerned and they weren't having a good time. And the groundskeeper said, "Yeah, you see the group ahead of you? They're great, aren't they? Those are the best blind golfers in the United States." And so they kept playing. It was a little less boisterous, but they got to the 18th hole and they were putting in. And of course, the pastor, he putted first, and then he looked up and he looked at his two friends and he said, "I need to repent. I can't believe that I said these things. And I'm going to go over and talk to them. Go ask them to forgive me." And the eye doctor, he putted, and he looked up and he said, "I can't believe that I didn't even notice what the problem was. My whole life has been given to restoring sight, and I was insensitive, and I didn't recognize what was really going on." And so the lawyer's turn to putt came up. He lined it up, putted, and ball went in. And he looked up, and his friends looked at him, and he said, "What? Why don't these guys just play at night?"
That's a good one. That
So
just
the problem is, it's often good that lawyers see things differently than other people do, but it's often not good as well.
right. And you were mentioning once when you were with us here that there's some young attorneys who need work, so they would go to different businesses, and if they don't see disclaimers, they would sue the company or the business and all that, which is really hurting people.
Yeah, I've been involved here in Colorado with clients that manufacture and distribute in California, Colorado companies that have been sued under Prop 65. And Prop 65 is the California Clean Water Act, and it really relates to not clean water, but certain disclaimers that you're supposed to give. And as you and I know, the disclaimers, anybody from California knows, they're everywhere. They're on your Starbucks entry. They're on the machines at Starbucks. They're on the entrance at the bottom of the Bayfront Hilton in San Diego in a giant sign. They're all over California. And so Prop 65 is an example of a statute that doesn't help anybody. A lot of Californians are aware that Starbucks was sued for failing to give certain on their packaging with regard to alleged carcinogens in the coffee. And that case went to the California Supreme Court. And so, in society as Christians, we want to be able to make our own decisions. We're dealing now with the quarantine and the issue of personal freedom. Who makes a better decision for us, government or our own selves? Can we be trusted as a society? With all the conflict that's going on right now, we should be asking that question. California, unfortunately, has answered this issue in too many ways in favor of regulation. And I think California was the American dream. So much went right there for so long. What are the issues there now? But Prop 65 is based on the idea that there are evil people lurking around trying to poison you, and if you don't force them to give a certain notice, then my last case there was I had a client who sold $10,000 worth of metal whistles from China to Big Five Sporting Goods. Some young lawyer went in and found a package there of the whistles, didn't have the notice on it that this is metal from Japan and it could cause China, and it could cause cancer. My client had to spend thousands of dollars just to resolve the matter. And well, you can say she didn't follow the law or it didn't follow the law. But if you ask me, Prop 65 doesn't work and California needs to get rid of it.
And we love you to come to California as much as possible. Thank you, Michael, for your time. I know you're a busy, busy man, especially at this time where people have loved ones in nursing homes and they are fearful about the whole coronavirus and dying. So how can people get a hold of your office if they need to connect with you or your staff or something?
Well, my website from the firm is at www.drc, that's Delta Romeo Charlie dash, we used to call that a hyphen, but some people call it a dash, drc-law.com.
Okay, so drc-law.com, and they can get a hold of your office.
That has information.
Thank you. That was very informative to myself and to people who are watching and listening. Thank you so much, Michael, for your time. Thank you for being on the board of the evangelistic ministry of Laughter for All and being a close friend of mine. I love you.
You're a great minister of the gospel, and it's a privilege. It's serving with you, Naz.
Thank you, brother. Well, God bless you. Thank you for your time.